All right, cool. Thank you all for coming. This has been probably a long time for me. I haven't been to DevTO, so thank you guys for having me again. Today I want to talk to you guys about a topic I enjoy talking about a lot, and I'm sure you guys enjoy so much, talking about software development methodologies. Yeah, no, it's boring. You should never cheer any talk about software development methodologies. We're all very tired of it. But there's a reason I bring this up. So before we get into the methodologies and the methods and the processes and all the fun Scrummy technologies that we're going to talk about, just want to talk a little bit about what does software development mean for me, for you guys, and everything. And those are kind of like quick lessons that I've learned over the years from doing different methods, different approaches, different things. But I want to have a quick disclaimer of saying I'm not talking about the process, I'm not talking about how you want to develop software, I'm just talking about the fundamentals and principles behind the processes that we use and the different methods that we follow. So let's take a quick step back, just introduce myself again. My name is Ahmad. I'm a development lead at Mashape. I lead the engineering team. The company is based out of San Francisco. I'm obviously here in Toronto, and I travel around a lot just because we have development teams all over the place. And I've worked in a lot of different companies across different kind of markets and segments. And I do a lot of community efforts, as we mentioned, Tech Masters here, and a few other meetups in the city as well. And for me, my main focus is on the technology itself and people working in the technology space. And how do we make everything we do better? And really the focus for me at the end of the day is to get shit done. And I'm sure for you as well. So, software development. Whether it's project management, tooling, feature creep, design work, iteration, whatever, you name it. There's all these buzzwords that happen around what we do day to day with technology that end up taking over our efforts into actually getting shit done. And whether you want to look at it from all the different processes and things that are out there, whether it's Waterfall or Scrum or Kanban or Lean or you name it, at the end of the day, we invented all these things just to help us manage the process and manage the way we communicate and get shit done. But the reality, you shouldn't really dwell on these labels and these methodologies because at the end of the day, they're just meant to be theoretical. They don't actually, in every one of those methodologies, if you actually read the description, every single one of them says your mileage will vary or you should probably adapt to whatever makes more sense for your team. But the problem is we end up taking them too much as a Bible to follow to the letter. And at the end of the day, everybody just wants to get shit done. So let me tell you a quick story about where I am now and what I'm doing with the company called Mashape. What we do, we build API tools and API products. A lot of open source technology, but also a lot of different products. This is our team. This is one of the very few rare moments that all of us from all different parts of the world, we came together at our San Francisco headquarters. We're actually distributed across all of the places. These are our clients. These are companies that we serve, and these are people, as you can imagine from the stereotype of the show, they're very opinionated people, they're very smart people, they're developers like you and I, so obviously by nature they always think they can do things better, and we have to sell to them. So we have to build technology products for developers, so that has its own set of challenges. But really what that means to me is that they have very high expectations, and we should aim to meet those expectations. Our team is actually spread across 7 different cities. We speak 8 different languages. We all speak English, obviously, but that's not my mother tongue, for example. We have 8 different languages that we come from, 8 different nationalities that we all come from, and across 6 different time zones. And in fact, we just added Spain to that list, so I haven't updated the slide yet. We literally just hired a guy 2 days ago in Spain. So now, 8 cities, 9 languages, 9 nationalities, same time zone though, because we already got a guy in London. So that obviously in itself means a whole lot of challenges. But to me, what it means as a team lead or as a person responsible for delivering engineering work, it means there's a lot of issues around language and communication. Because we can say the same thing in the same language, but it might mean different things because of our cultural backgrounds, different expectations that we have. We might have to run across a lot of issues in terms of collaboration because of the time zone differences. And obviously because of the physical separation, there's a lot of things we can't just do. We can't just go into a whiteboard and work things out together. So there's a lot of problems that come from that. And I've actually seen this not just at this current company, this is an exaggerated example. We just happen to be a small team that just wants to hire people anywhere around the world, but I've lived this in many different roles and companies prior to this as well. And at the end of the day, that's all we want to do is just to get shit done. We don't want to get too caught up in the process, too caught up in the tools. We just want to ship things and sell our products. So we tried all the different methodologies, we tried all the different approaches to doing this, and nothing worked really very well. So what we ended up doing all went back to something that we were all familiar with, which is the open source community. I contribute a lot to open source, a lot of my team members contribute to open source, and it's part of our DNA anyways. And because of the physical separation that we ended up having and the time zone differences, we ended up defaulting to the same way as we communicate with other people for open source projects. These are people who don't work with us, they're not working on the same project, but we're collaborating together in a way that seems to be successful. So these people are spread across everywhere in the world. They speak all different languages, and they really, and at the end of the day, they deliver things. They get shit done. So if you think of any example of the open source world, whether it's something as core as the Linux kernel, or some big foundation like Apache, or even the small little projects that we use day to day from WordPress to like some frameworks, these are not built by teams who are sitting together in the same room, who go to a whiteboard, design something, and then go and develop it for a Scrum or Kanban board. These are people from all around the world working at different companies even, and still somehow they're able to deliver. They're able to ship products. Obviously nothing without hiccups, but they don't have a project manager, they don't have a development manager, they don't have a process and a schedule per se that they follow, but somehow again they're still able to get shit done. So what I went out and did, and I've been doing this for a better part of the year now, I've been looking at some of the core tenets that these teams end up following, and trying to deduce from that what is this open development methodology that everybody seems to be fall into by default without actually following a process or following something as detailed as Scrum or Kanban or things that are very rigorous in their aspects. So it ended up being these 7 different things, quality being the top thing. One of the most common threads across all these developments in the open source world is that they're all focused on quality. Whether it's quality of code, or quality of design, or quality of the documentation. And this, by the way, applies not just to development teams. When I say software development, I mean technologists, developers, designers, marketers, sales. That's all part of the same equation. But they all have that same kind of common thread. Number 1, quality. Number 2, they focus on documentation. Because of the physical separation, because of the time zone difference, because of the language barrier, the best way to get around that is to actually document things up front. Whether it's the design team documenting work for the developers, or the developers documenting work for each other, or simply the end result of the product team documenting the work for the sales team or the marketing team, that all has to be documented up front. Same thing with testing. You test your design just as you will as you test your code. In fact, I would argue that we actually do better testing of design and user experience than we do with our code. And that's an ongoing kind of joke for development teams that we don't do enough unit tests. But we do a lot of research, a lot of product research before going in. That actually applies as tests. Discussion is open. Everybody has a say. Everybody gets to have an open discussion. It's not a team that goes behind closed walls and discusses things. It's something that happens in a group, together, or physically separated, using messaging communication techniques, whether it's email or chat systems or so on. When there's something that needs to be discussed, it happens in the open. And this kind of translates to being transparent. There's no closed door meetings. In the open source community, things just happen in the open. And that allows people who are both users and or developers or designers to come together and voice their opinions, which actually leads to something important. I should have reordered that last 2 points. It's democracy. These teams are democratic by nature because there is no leader, there is no owner, there is no boss person who's going to make that decision. Or as I'd like to call them, the managers, single points of failures. There's no worrying about your job security. There's no worrying about offending somebody or not by saying the wrong thing. Go ahead.
Yeah, for democracy, can you explain tactics? Like tactically, how does that?
I'll get into that for a bit. Yeah. And then obviously because of the separation, whether it's physical separation or time separation, everything happens asynchronously. So you don't expect an immediate response for things, so things just happen asynchronously over time. So I want to get into more details about each one of those. When I talk about quality, we can think of it as code quality, as developers do, or you can think of it as a great user experience, as designers do, or you can think of it as product messaging, as marketers do. But at the end of the day, it's the same questions that you ask yourself and ask your team members so that you can actually deliver better quality. So you want to ask, is this code legible? Is this code testable? Is this code modular? Is this code economical? Same thing applies for design. Is this design economical? Is this design legible? Is this design usable? Same thing for messaging and marketing. So every question you ask doesn't only help you make a better decision about the product, it helps your team members also make better decisions and helps that communication chain down the road. So this is a quote I love about design quality. It's, it could be used as a threat, but at the same time, it's a reality check. How many times have you adopted code from somebody and end up being not so great or not clear enough, and it just frustrates you, ends up costing you stress and costing the company money, perhaps? Again, when I say documentation, a lot of people default to thinking of developer documentation or code documentation, but it's not just that. When you receive a design PSD file from your design team, you want documentation of that. You want explanation to what is it supposed to be, how is it supposed to work. Same thing as your marketing team and your sales team need documentation about how the product is supposed to work. So those kind of documentation needs exist across the board. Again, the ongoing kind of joke about developers that developers don't like to write documentation, but the same applies to every aspect of building a product. And documentation ends up being the first thing to suffer in terms of using Scrum or Kanban or any of those methodologies. It just goes out the door. We just don't have the document, you have to ship it. And that's end up hurting your team, end up hurting the client, end up hurting the product in general. So you want to avoid those things. Again, another quote here for documentation that I find to be very true. The bare minimum is still good. It's not a perfect scenario. So, who doesn't want to have sex, honestly? Bad or good, you want to have it. So same thing for documentation. Just don't skip it. Testing. Again, this is another thing that usually is targeted on developers. Developers are not testing their code enough, they're not doing their work enough, or they're not validating the new code or new functionality enough. But the reality is, again, it applies to everything. You want to actually do research up front about your business theory. That's called testing. You want to do research about the user experience and how people are expecting to interact with that product. That's called testing. You want to actually release a product and then test your messaging in your marketing department and how people receive your product. That's also called testing. And the result of all that is that you go into the iteration and you adjust and you adapt. At the end of the day, testing is also part of that whole equation. If you have a good documentation, if you have a good focus on quality, then the test becomes more focused on improving your product. There's a quote from Boris Beiser here about, it's not just writing tests, but it's getting into that mindset of the test design thinking. Because the more you think about how you're going to test something, the more you end up actually affecting the quality of the code or the product that you're building. Because to make your test more meaningful, your product needs to be done in a certain way that allows it to be testable and allows it to be more focused on quality. So that actually helps you. And that also, the whole process of thinking through it also helps you go into a better documentation, better explanation of how your product is supposed to work. Getting into open discussion. I've seen it many, many times, and I'm sure you guys have too, where sometimes you have design teams separate from development teams, sometimes you have a management team separate from the development team, and decisions are being communicated rather than the conversation being communicated. So what ends up happening is you're playing broken telephone in a lot of scenarios, or you end up having lack of understanding of why that decision came to be, or what's the motivation behind it. So those two things go hand in hand, open discussion and transparency. In many cases, when you're working in a company and you have the managers making decisions, they probably have to evaluate a lot of things. It's not like they don't trust you to include you enough. They think sometimes that they're sheltering you from some of the noise, sheltering you from the business aspects of things. But then you as a developer, or you as a designer, or you as a project manager, not having that context also affects the ability for you to make decisions. So to me, you have to be open in your discussion, you have to be transparent. And again, the transparency in a lot of cases ends up being confused by position of power and position of ownership. In a lot of cases, business owners, like I said, or managers they think they want to shelter people away from the hardship that they're dealing with. But on the other side, people who have to make decisions about the product, decisions about the code, decisions about the quality of the design, they don't have these contexts. They're not going to be able to do the best that they can. And honestly, to me, it's not just a focus on the software development aspect of it, but also as human beings, as we work together, the better way we can work together is by being open and transparent about everything that's facing us. And that actually helps make a better work environment, which in turn, I think, makes a better product. And then at the end, if everything is asynchronous, as life is, when you're thinking about going out to the shop and buying something, or you're thinking about making a decision about a product, you don't just think of things that happen in sequences. You think of things that are happening at the same time, and then there's a result at the end of it. That's how life works. That's how we operate as human beings. That's how our brain works. So you can't really automate human beings as you would automate machines. So there's nobody who said any good word about that, so I mean, no. But that's the thing. Like, you go into all these business process planning meetings and big corporate HR meetings, and they talk about the process and how we're going to improve the output of our teamwork. And they think of human beings as machines that you can put in a certain positions along an assembly line in a certain organization and a certain setup, and then if you do it right, you'll end up having a better outcome. But that's not true, because we're not cogs in a machine. We're human beings. We interact, we feel, we have to change our behavior and learn from things. So this whole idea that we need to have a process in place that can actually have a designed input and a desired output, I think is flawed by nature. And again, to go back to your question about democracy, it's all about trust to me, right? Like, I had a different quote here from some of the current US president hopefuls, but I decided to go with an older one because it was really a better kind of message here. Is the point of democracy is not to just give people a voice, because like having a voice by itself doesn't really help solve a problem, doesn't even help you evolve, doesn't really help you learn. The point of democracy to me is allowing people to grow by voicing their opinions, and as much as they will learn from each other, but also teach each other. Right? So, people who just joined the team yesterday who may not have the full context of the product, or maybe a junior developer who doesn't really understand the complexity of the system, they're going to have a voice, and it may not be the wisest of voices, but if you muffle that voice from the start, then that person is just not going to learn. They're not going to try to learn. They're not going to get the feedback about why their idea was bad. So by coming into the aspect of having a democracy in place where everybody can actually vote on things and decide of what they think is good or not, then you can exchange ideas and you can learn. And actually, even for me, like I've been in the technology business for 15 plus years, and I think I know a lot of good things, but I'm always surprised by the most random of opportunities where people who are the most junior people or people who are the least experienced people might just throw something in the air. They may not even fully comprehend it or understand it, but it actually solves a problem that all the other same people haven't really considered. And it could be a combination of things. It's not that they're smarter or less brighter or any other scenario, just because they're outside of that tunnel vision that most of us end up being in anyways. So I don't actually come here with answers. I come here with questions, and that's the trap that I got you guys all into now, hopefully. I don't actually have the final prescribed result of what this should look like or what it should be. So this is a project, and this is an open source project in itself. So I actually want you guys to collaborate and work together so we can define how do these aspects actually make our work process better, how do we actually improve our methodologies better. I don't want to be like as the other Agile and Scrum methods and all these things came to be. I don't want to have a couple of people go into a room and then come up with the manifesto and say, here you go, now the rest of the world should follow this. I don't think that's productive. I think this is something that should be evolving, that should grow together. And again, keep in context, at the end of the day, the goal is to get shit done. So if you want to collaborate, if you want to have this open discussion, if you want to voice your opinion and see how we can all improve our work methods and make software great again, there's the website. I put all this stuff up on the website, and there's actually a GitHub discussion going on. And I've actually been presenting this talk in a number of conferences, and a lot of people from around the world are contributing and having their opinions. And it's actually a very interesting conversation, and I'm learning from it as much as I'm trying to share my experience. So I would love for you guys to also collaborate on that and have your say. Thank you. Any questions?
Two questions, I guess. First, you're saying that you're proposing this as an alternative to existing, SDLCs or approaches to doing development. Like, as you go through your points here, I mean,
Go back to the,
like my understanding of if you actually implement Agile properly with adaptability being the primary driver, I don't see how any of this could work in Agile.
yeah, and again, I'm not trying to talk about process here. I'm trying to talk about the foundation of what our motivations are in using things like Agile or Scrum or so on. Agile and Scrum, in my opinion, end up being too focused on the process and less on foundation. And again, it might work for some teams, it might not work for some other teams, it might be a variation of success in different areas. But to me, the way we do software has evolved over the years a lot, especially now where we have this open kind of world economy where people can work from anywhere. So how do you solve problems like having daily stand-ups? It just doesn't work, right? So I don't want to focus on the process, I want to focus on the foundation and the motivation behind it.
So the second question, I've had some experience working with student teams. Mostly it's been pretty negative, but occasionally it's pretty good. One of the things that I've always found to be a challenge is, number one, everybody understanding context at the same time, the same way, at the same level. And number two, trying to have decision-making occur in such a way that we can actually get shit done in the show, as opposed to things start to evolve and we started off talking about some requirements, somebody then launched into why absolutely everything we do now is bullshit, and then somebody throws in how the new Raspberry Pi is really cool, and then the cat pictures come out, and then like how do you
And that's what
how do you actually ship and get paid?
Yeah, so that's the biggest conflict is when people look at open source and they say, okay, well, people in the open source community, they don't have to worry about the shipping dates. They don't have to worry about paying clients. They don't have to worry about that. I would argue differ, because if you've ever seen an open source project release a broken code or release something late and you see the backlash they get, it's way more painful than dealing with a paying client. So to me, it's you said a keyword there is like having everybody together agree on things on the same time, and I think that is a key aspect of it. The way we work, having everything expected to be synchronous, where we actually live our lives asynchronously, I think that's a big aspect of it. So if you actually try to think of it from that perspective, getting in, then all of a sudden you don't need people to actually be working toward the same target at the same time. You want people to be working at the same target at the end goal. And how they get there, whenever they get there, is okay, as long as that end goal is reached. So it's just a different way of thinking. It's not so much a different tool or process to follow again. And again, I don't have the answers. I want this to be a collaborative effort to better define that. And actually there's a cool discussion going on the GitHub project now where people are talking about, okay, how can we use the scientific method to try and error different ways of doing this and actually evaluate success versus failure ratio. So some guy actually put in some crazy mathematical equations for there, and I'm trying to understand them, but I'm not that good at it. Yeah. Any other questions?
Do you have any interesting anecdotes, like real-world experiences, to sort of illustrate getting over sort of very structured issues that you saw?
Yeah, so we just recently launched a massive open source project called Kong. It's an open source API management product, and it's been a tool that we've developed internally for so long, but we wanted to open source it to the world. And we're now talking to governments, financial institutions, healthcare companies, massive corporations who have been paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to millions of dollars in contracts to SAP and IBM and all these big companies for providing the same level of tooling. And then they come to us and they say, okay, well, how are you going to provide me their timeline and your roadmap and your delivery schedules and all of that? And I just basically say, you're not getting that. And it takes them a second, and then they're like, well, that doesn't sound good. I'm like, why not? I'm giving you an open source project. I'm not giving you my company's work. I'm giving you the whole community's work, right? So, and that changes their perspective about it. It's no longer an expectation of this is the date, this is the end product that I want. It's a relationship. So, and that actually makes it a lot easier for developing software in general, but also because it makes it a more attractive conversation to have with a client of actually, I don't want to talk to you as a client, I want to talk to you as a partner. Right? So that actually changed the whole dynamic in terms of how we actually sell our solutions. Because the first thing I tell them, I'm not giving you support contracts and professional services, I'm giving you a relationship. And if you're not interested in recuperating that relationship, it's not just monetary. I want to learn from you as much as I want to teach you, as much as I want to solve your problems. They actually appreciate that better, and that becomes a different conversation with them. So actually everybody I've talked to so far have actually liked that. And we're actually, I'm not going to tell you who, but some government is actually using our products. And they love it. And they've been paying millions of dollars in contracts to our competitors who had that traditional client-vendor relationship. And we changed the dynamic on that by going this way. Okay, one last question.
Under your call of test everything,
Yeah.
for a company that maybe has introduced tests or is beginning to introduce tests, do you have any advice on how to not go too far or how to go far enough?
That's definitely a problem. Even for a company our size, which we're a small team, sometimes you end up spending too much time on design research and user experience research, and at the end of the day, I have to step in and say, dude, it's just a button. Okay? It's not about the process of doing tests. It's not about the process of how much tests or how little tests you do. It's about changing the way of thinking from, hey, let's wait for the development manager to tell the project manager what the requirements from the business are or the client are, so the project manager can put them into Jira so that the developers can look at them and put estimates. It's not about that. It's about what's the problem you're trying to solve. Okay, here's a couple of approaches to how we want to solve the problem. Now let's evaluate that. Let's test that, right? And that starts there. So if you start with that mindset, then it's a different approach. It's no longer about how little or how too much are you doing. Thank you, guys.